College football nerds here talking week 1 action and week 2 previews. That means we've got stuff to actually discuss, and it's not hypothetical crap anymore. It's actually talking about what happened on the field. I got Josh with me. We're going to get nerdy. I want to remind y'all we made some announcements last week. We're going to keep making them for the next couple of weeks. We launched a new website, collegefootballnerds.com. It's awesome. We're trying to make this a stats heaven for college football fans. We've got regular box scores and stats and stuff like that, but we're also unleashing the model to y'all in week 4, which means you can go on and compare any two teams you want, and it'll spit out the same simulation that we use on the show. We've got NFL U stats, so this is week 1 coming up for NFL. You can pick your team, and it'll show you all the players in one spot. So you pick Ohio State, and you get all those players in one spot. You don't have to search a bunch of box scores. We got a pick 'em going on right now, $500 prize for September. If you've missed out, you can still sign up and play along, and then come October, you'll be eligible for that October prize because you're probably not going to win. We've got some people who are undefeated right now if you're trying to get this month. All right, Josh, let's talk kind of what happened, what we saw this weekend. As of this recording, LSU and Florida State haven't played yet. Duke and Clemson have not played yet. We previewed both of those games, so people can go watch that if they want. But I think this will probably go up before that happens. Biggest news, I think, is probably TCU Colorado. Colorado came in a 20.5 point underdog, and there were a lot of questions around what Deion Sanders could do with this team, piecing together transfers, jettisoning half the program from last year that went 1-11. They got the win against TCU, and as always, we tell people don't overreact to week 1. And I think that's what we're going to say today. There's some good, there's some concern, but in general, and not just with this game, but in everything we discussed today, especially since this year seems like there might be more parity, we need to make sure we don't overreact, good or bad.
I almost tweeted about it in the morning on Saturday, and I wish I had because of some of the reactions we saw. Everyone was talking about Colorado and Colorado may or may not be, and people were either thinking Colorado's going to be great or Colorado's going to suck. You know, we had some takes out there that were taken as being negative. I don't really think any of ours were intended to be overly negative, just making the point that, you know, like Shedeur Sanders was a career 7.7 yards per attempt guy. And we had some stuff sort of saying we don't understand what the hype is, because if he's the same guy in FBS that he was in FCS, he's going to be merely an above average quarterback. It doesn't really make sense for a Heisman conversation. And it didn't make a lot of sense to think that his statistics were going to improve considerably moving up a level. But TCU themselves were only projected to have 7.5 wins, or projected to be a 7-5 team this year. And they had a lot of questions themselves. The whole front seven on that team is really completely rebuilt. They lost the best pass rushers on the team. And so we didn't really know exactly what we were going to get. And I think what we got was a much more coherent, competent team from Colorado than was expected. And when I say that, I say it for the same reason that we were skittish on Florida. You know, Florida came out of the gate with a ton of transfers on Thursday night and looked like trash. I mean, their offensive line was straight garbage. I don't know any other way to describe it. We had cautioned in our Florida-Utah preview that I was concerned because Florida was starting a guy at right tackle that had been benched after 1 or 2 starts at Alabama for being so bad that weird 2021 Iron Bowl, when everybody assumed Alabama's offense was in the tank, was really because of, in large part, how bad the current right tackle at Florida had been beat at the time, Damian George Jr. But, you know, that's kind of what you expect with a large degree of transfers. And instead, you end up with a Colorado team that walks out of the gate, and they look really competent. I mean, they knew how to run the offensive scheme. The receivers and the quarterback are on the same page. Obviously, there weren't many incompletions thrown. But it was sort of to me, that game was a combination of 2 things, right? One, you had a TCU team I thought was really out of sorts. I think they didn't seem to really know offensively what it is they needed to do. I feel like defensively, look, anytime somebody's running free on a pass play and he's open by more than 10 yards, something went wrong defensively. There should never be a point at which a receiver is open by a larger gap than that, because either your technique is broken down or more often you've had a coverage bust. Any other time, the speed difference between players at this level is not enough that you should ever be that open unless somebody's done something wrong. And that was happening a lot in this game. But you have to give a lot of credit for Colorado to come out prepared and with a quarterback that understood the system well enough that, like, when they brought a blitz and the running back was open, he hit the running back and he made a big play. That's not a small thing. That says a lot about Shedeur Sanders. It says a lot about his understanding of the scheme, which it's important to remember it's really his third year in a lot of ways in the same scheme. We may talk about that for a minute. So it was this weird combination of two teams, and it balancing out where one thing is and another thing isn't. It's really hard, though, after only 1 week of evaluation.
Yeah, and there's this weird, like, protectionism, I think, around Colorado, and I don't know what it is, but if you mention the reality that TCU is probably not very good at defensively, and I'm going to have, you've got some stats at the ready, I'm going to have you throw them up audibly here in a second. But I think two things can be true. Like, Colorado's offense was great, and I think that the numbers that Sanders put up were good against an actual FCS team or a bad defensive team. That's not the thing. The thing is they can be good and TCU can be bad, and that can inform us on what to maybe not expect every week. And what you said yesterday on Twitter was, hey, this is great. Don't expect or don't overreact into thinking that Sanders is going to put up 500 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns every single week. And I think people took offense to that in some way, but really that's the truth. We don't want to overreact to week one. What I said on Twitter, and I did say this before the game, about midweek, I said, we're not going to overreact good or bad. If they come out and fall on their face, we're not going to overreact to that either because they've got a lot of transfers. It's going to take time for them to gel, and that's just going to happen. But I heard multiple people in the middle of the day, so they didn't even wait till the day finished. I heard multiple commentators, professional sports writers say that Sanders has their Heisman vote. After one game against a trash defense without even having to see the rest of the field, which really rubbed me the wrong way as someone who wants to process data and understand what happened. But I'm going to throw it back to you. Give us some of those TCU numbers. And again, this is not to minimize what Colorado did. It's to contextualize why we should maybe pump the brakes on giving the guy the Heisman before even all the teams have played.
Yeah, in the context here is that TCU was quite bad defensively last year. And when I say bad, I mean quite bad. I think a lot of people that aren't informed on them as a football team or just follow the playoffs and where teams appear in the playoffs may have assumed that TCU, because they were a playoff team, was at least a good defensive team. They were 95th in the country in defense. That's quite bad. And what's more striking is in explosive plays allowed. And in this case, I'm defining it as plays of 20 yards or more. TCU was 130th out of 131 in 20-plus yards plays allowed in 2022. This was one of the single worst units in the country at allowing explosive plays last year. That team lost a large chunk of its front seven. They could not generate a pass rush against Colorado. Now, to what you were just saying, Daniel, it doesn't take away from Colorado to say they took advantage of that weakness. They were able to exploit it and generate explosive plays. I did not expect a team full of transfers to be able to do that. That was not really a reflection of the coaching staff. It's a reflection of any coaching staff, just like we didn't see it out of Florida that they had a team full of transfers and the offense didn't function. They played really coherently. They were able to take advantage of opportunities. They showed their talent, and they were able to exploit it. But some of the things, in particular, the leading receiver in that game was not Travis Hunter, really, in terms of yardage. The leading receiver in terms of yardage was Dylan Edwards, the running back. Now, Edwards is 5'9", 170 pounds. He's extremely fast. There were two big plays in that game where TCU brought a blitz. Shedeur Sanders aptly read the blitz. He dumped it to the running back in the flat. And the late game score in particular, I think he went 70 yards out of the backfield for a touchdown. That play kind of highlights a couple things. One, in their scheme, TCU running a 3-3-5 should not be allowing a back out of the backfield to run untouched for 70 yards. The whole point of that scheme is you got 3 safeties in the field and you got a 5-man umbrella on top. You should really never be allowing a guy to just flow freely into the second level and beyond. It's all about letting someone catch something in front of you and collapsing. You usually get gouged in the run game and the short passing game, and you really take away most of the deep passing game. And somehow they take away none of it. That's a telling statement about TCU and where they're at defensively. But it's also telling about Colorado that they had the team speed to be able to exploit that for a touchdown. There was a running back that was in trail coverage, and he couldn't even get a hand on Edwards because of how fast he is. And Shedeur Sanders read a linebacker blitz, threw over the blitz to get it to Edwards in the first place, which shows his understanding of the offense. And, one of the tweets, my contribution to the Twitter sphere was I noted, Shedeur Sanders is not, despite being a Sanders, is not some big explosive dual threat runner. I think people would assume, father being one of the all-time track stars, that he's going to be a big runner. He's athletic, but his real skill is he's clearly a guy that's been taught how to play football from a young age. He has a phenomenal understanding of the offense and how to distribute to the ball. And that's what really showed up in the TCU game. The problem in projecting that game downstream is most teams are not going to give 5 to 10 yard cushions on receivers like that in a short passing game scheme, such that it's going to be quite that easy. And I think Colorado's shown the ability to execute in spite of that, but it's still a little bit of a projection. And it's a kind of a weird one too. And I don't know if you want to mention this, Daniel, but their scheme was much more air raid than I expected. And I'd watched tape out of tape of them when he was down at Jackson State. And even then, I knew there was short passing game, but it was more of a West Coast scheme. This was almost air raid. They didn't run the ball hardly at all.
Yeah, and I think that their offensive line did pretty well in pass protection. The whole team in general is pretty undersized, and they leverage their speed a lot offensively, but their size and depth showed up defensively as a concern. And I think that is another nod to the staff in doing in using their talent in the ways that they knew they could get some production out of them, and not banging their head against the wall trying to make something happen that they knew wouldn't. And that's trying to grind out a run game just wasn't going to happen. When they play a team like maybe Nebraska next week, who's much better defensively, it'll be interesting to see how they adjust. But kind of like we've seen with some teams like Ohio State. I don't want to compare to Ohio State yet, but we've always said that Ohio State, one of the things in the Big Ten is they'll play a team that can really play well offensively or a team that can really play well defensively, and they don't see a lot of that in the same game. You're not going to see that really for Colorado until maybe Oregon, but I'm really interested to see how they fare against teams who are just as fast but also huge. I think that's where the size of Hunter might show up a little more as a negative, but kudos to them for exploiting what they could against this TCU defense.
Yeah, I agree. And ultimately I think the jury is still kind of out, as much as some people may take offense to it. I mean, the reality is they're going to play the games, and they're going to prove themselves right or prove themselves wrong. And there's nothing any of us saying on camera is going to change any of that. They have a schedule where it's going to be proven out. But I thought it was telling that the Nebraska-Colorado line, after Nebraska lost to Minnesota in painful fashion for Nebraska fans, and
normal fashion.
Yeah, I heard they've set the record now for most one-loss or one-score losses in a 2-year, 3-year, 4-year, 5-year, 6-year, 7-year, 8-year, and 9-year span in the last 100 years.
Yikes.
Literally,
that's tough.
Yeah, it's tough. But after that and Colorado's performance, the line for the Nebraska-Colorado game moved an entire field goal from plus 2.5 to minus 1.5 for Colorado. So that kind of tells you from Vegas's perspective, and again, we kind of have a Vegas mindset. Colorado is better than we expected them to be, but as far as Vegas is concerned relative to Nebraska, they are a field goal better versus Nebraska than they were expected to be. And I think that tells you just how much, from a sharp perspective, the attitude is don't overreact to a game like this. And in fact, I almost find it concerning because they're almost inviting you to bet on Colorado given their week 1 performance. And